This is really an opportunity for us to have a conversation about the value of the Specialisation Verification Framework, whether that's something that you're ready to pursue an application for right now, or whether it's something that you just want to learn more about and where that might fit. I think there's some real value in learning more about it for everybody. I will run you through very briefly the big picture of what the framework is, and we'll have a chat about the application process and the criteria, etc., that sit alongside or as part of that framework. The best part of today, though, is that we've got a number of people joining us today to take part in a panel discussion. Towards the end of the session, we'll have an opportunity for you to ask some questions and have a bit more of a conversation, and then we will just briefly look at what to do next. I would really like to say a special thank you and welcome to our panel for today. We have Anne, Bill and Matt all joining us. Can I ask you guys to just give us a one-sentence summary of who you are and why you're joining us today?
My name's Anne Warden. I'm the Veteran Support Coordinator at Vasey RSL Care. I support our veterans who are in independent living. We have 285 units. We're community housing. And so I link them into support services. And I'm here today to talk about veteran experience and how to engage with veterans.
Bill Kelleher. I'm a veteran, ex-Navy, 82 years of age now. Currently living in the ex-service accommodation that Vasey RSL provides, but at some stage we'll probably contemplate moving to the next level. So any discussion we have today will impact on me in the future for sure.
My name's Matt Curson. I'm one of the veteran peer advisors with Open Arms, Veterans and Families Counselling. We provide everything from counselling, care coordination, peer services, as well as education programs for veterans, their families, and the wider community as well.
Fantastic. If people aren't familiar with Open Arms, I would really highly encourage everybody to learn a bit more about Open Arms. It's an incredibly valuable resource and service for all of us. Thank you, Anne, Bill and Matt. Really great to have you all as part of today's conversation, and it's a really valuable opportunity for us to learn from you all. So I'm looking forward to hearing your ideas as we go through today. Let's have a chat about what the Specialisation Verification Framework is and why we're having this conversation today. I'm sure everybody is very aware of the Royal Commission into Aged Care that recently occurred. Within the Royal Commission, one of the things that really strongly came out as a message was that right across our sector, we need to be better at more proactively acknowledging and respecting and being capable of responding to the needs and preferences and experiences of all older people, and that we have a very diverse community. So responding to diversity is core business for all of us. It's not an optional extra or an add-on. It is a requirement as part of the aged care quality standards, part of our Charter of Aged Care Rights that we recognise and respond to everybody's needs and acknowledge that they are unique. And we also have the Aged Care Diversity Framework as well. One of the recommendations that came out from the Royal Commission was that the previous system that we had, where organisations were able to nominate themselves as being capable of delivering specialised care, wasn't really adequate, and that we needed to have a better system where we could validate whether organisations did have the commitment and capacity and were equipped to deliver specialised care to all older people, and particularly people within those special needs groups. The Specialisation Verification Framework was therefore developed by AHA in collaboration with a number of experts and peak bodies, service providers and older people themselves. And in mid-2022, the framework was up and running, and applications have begun to be processed. Really, the Specialisation Verification Framework is about providing you with the opportunity to be able to demonstrate that your organisation is equipped to deliver those more specialised services, that you really understand the needs of diverse communities, and that you are going above and beyond the requirements of the aged care quality standards. What does that look like? As I said, it's the Specialisation Verification Framework is an optional add-on process. It is not an essential for everybody. It is something that you opt into. Having said that, the requirement to be able to be capable of delivering services that are appropriate and inclusive for all older people is not optional and is not an add-on. That is absolutely a requirement and an expectation. The key difference with the Specialisation Verification Framework is that it provides you the opportunity to share with the community that you do have that capacity and that you are working very specifically to build the capacity across your organisation and across all of your staff and volunteers to be able to deliver inclusive care for specific communities and potentially even just within specific programs in your organisation. The framework includes a number of specific criteria, and we will run through those very quickly at the end of today, and that you are required to provide evidence to demonstrate your capacity against those criteria. There's also a process within the framework that clients and carers provide feedback directly to AHA about your capacity to deliver those inclusive services. You might be at a place at the moment where you're not sure whether specialisation verification is something that you want to pursue right at the moment. But I think understanding what the framework is and what it includes is actually really valuable for all providers, whether or not you're ready to pursue that verification right now. What it does is really set a benchmark about what inclusive practice looks like, what some of the actions are that you can be taking to become more inclusive, and what kind of evidence you can provide to share, your capacity, both through verification, but also more broadly, how can you communicate your capacity to the community and to older people that might be looking for a service provider as well. So wherever you're at, I think that there is some real value. I think one of the key benefits of verification is really about making sure that you can promote your services to people and that consumers are better equipped to make informed decision about which service might be right for them. And that's something that I know we've heard feedback from a number of older people along the way about how important that is for them. It also really helps assessors be able to make the most appropriate referrals possible as well, which is also really important. So at the front line, the key difference that being verified makes is that verified providers have that information included on the Find a Provider tool via the My Aged Care website. So when you're looking for providers on the Find a Provider tool, you can refine your search by a number of things that are important to you. And you can see here, this is a screenshot from Find a Provider, that one of those things is being able to search via specialisations. So those specialisations are set up according to the 9 special needs groups that are identified within the Aged Care Act. The Specialisation Verification Framework doesn't apply to these other filters. So you can also filter according to things like the languages, faith, and specific health supports. For example, if you're equipped to work with people who have dementia or cognitive impairment, those are all things that as an organisation you would still self-nominate for. The Specialisation Verification Framework applies specifically to this first box, this around specialised care. When you can filter, you can choose whichever of the special needs groups that you might identify with, and then that will come up as you go through the process in selecting providers. If, for example, I said that I lived in Camberwell, I was looking for help at home, and I'm a veteran, then I can filter my search accordingly, and the verified providers will show up with this tick. We can see that Vasey RSL Home Care is verified as specialised in working with veterans, and it also then provides you details about how they achieve their verification. These are the criteria that Vasey RSL Care provided evidence against to achieve that verification for their work with veterans. And if an organisation perhaps had the Rainbow Tick accreditation and were verified to work with LGBTI older people as well, all of those verifications would show up here. So as an older person or an assessor or anyone in the community, if I'm a veteran, I can then automatically search for organisations that are verified as being equipped to be able to work with me, which will really build my confidence to be able to choose a provider that is a good fit. Some of the benefits, I think, are really about being able to make informed decisions and knowing that the information that is available on the Find a Provider tool is reliable, that there is evidence to back it up. We can't just choose to say, yes, I'm equipped and ready to work with Aboriginal elders, for example. For that to go up as being my organisation being specialised, I have to be able to back that up with some evidence. As I said, I think the other thing is being able to make more appropriate referrals as well. For service providers, I think it's really a fantastic way to be able to demonstrate the work that you're doing to your community and your commitment to inclusion and being able to design and deliver services that are appropriate for the older people in your community. It's a really good way to set your organisation apart. So to be able to promote your organisation to the right consumers and people, and really, again, highlight the work that you're doing in this space. Whether or not you decide to go ahead with verification right now, it's really helpful to get to know what the criteria are. I think that when we look at them, there's lots of things in there that you'll say, oh, we're already doing work in this space. Verification doesn't have to be a huge amount of work. So it might be an opportunity to celebrate some of the work you're already doing, absolutely guide what you're going to be doing next in terms of your quality improvement and really working towards inclusion as well. So I think that it's helpful wherever you are in your journey. We talked about before that within the Aged Care Act, there are 9 special needs groups that are identified. I want to acknowledge upfront that the language of special needs group is in itself not particularly inclusive and probably doesn't reflect what we would consider now to be a best practice approach. The Aged Care Act is currently being reviewed and a new version will be released within the next 12 months. Certainly the requirements around inclusion and the expectation both within the Aged Care Act and also within the new version of the Aged Care Quality Standards will absolutely be maintained. And if anything, it looks like those things will be strengthened. But I think that we will be moving away from the language of special needs groups, which is certainly something that I imagine most people in this room would applaud and feel comfortable with. Having said that, I'm going to continue just using that language for today because that's how it's identified at the moment. So within the Aged Care Act, there are these 9 special needs groups identified. And I also just want to acknowledge that in terms of the aged care quality standards, they expand the diversity characteristics that are considered within the diversity framework. So that also looks at working with people with disability, working with people with cognitive impairment and dementia, and working with people experiencing poor mental health as well. So those diversity characteristics are added in on top of these 9 existing special needs groups. In terms of our aged care quality standards, you need to be thinking more broadly around diversity. And really our requirement is to be set up to be able to be designing services that are inclusive, delivering individualised, person-centred care, and evaluating and reviewing what we're doing and having that ongoing quality improvement. Now, when we're thinking about the diversity within our community, it's not just about the diversity that you can see. It's also not about just being able and capable of responding to the diversity that you already have or that you already know about, particularly within your existing group of clients and carers, but it's about being able to be responsive to the needs of all older people in your community. And there are lots of diversity characteristics that you can't see and that you certainly don't need to count to be able to be inclusive. So being inclusive is not about, and certainly not dependent on people disclosing all of these experiences or circumstances. But as an organisation, we need to be really thinking about what some of the common challenges or barriers might be, what some of people's experiences might be, and how we as organisations and as staff can be prepared to support and respond to people individually. One of the messages that I certainly have heard lots over my time working in this space is we're inclusive because we treat everyone the same. And so it doesn't matter who's coming to us, we treat everyone the same. I think that message is shared with really good intentions, and the idea is about trying to be respectful. But in practice, what we know works is that everybody is different and everybody requires a different approach. So we really need to be working as organisations away from that idea of treating everyone the same and moving towards equity, which is really about understanding that everyone's different. And what we are aiming to do is remove barriers so that we're inclusive for as many people as possible, and working in ways that ensures that everybody has the resources they need to succeed, which is not treating everyone the same, but treating everyone differently. So their opportunity to have the best possible service is equitable. Big picture, I just want to identify who we're talking about when we're talking about working with veterans. The broad definition is that a veteran is someone that served in the military. I think it's important to recognise that we live in a really multicultural community, and we're not just talking about people who've served in the Australian Defence Force, but older people may be veterans who have served in forces in other countries. And our veteran community is not just the veterans who have served themselves, but also the people around them. So their partners, children, war widows and widowers are certainly a group that for older veterans has been a sort of priority group. And if you look at DVA services, for example, veterans and war widows are both eligible to access support. One of the things that is potentially unique about working with veterans is that the profile of our veterans that are accessing aged care and going to be accessing aged care in the coming years is really changing. You may have had experience working with World War I and II veterans in the past, but those people's experience might be really different to some of the other veterans that might be coming into and through and working in your services at the moment. And I might just ask you about whether you've got any insight you'd like to share about that kind of changing profile of our veteran community at the moment.
Sure, Kate. Look, definitely recently it's changed. Well, not recently, but in the last 10 years, we've seen an evolution from the old digger from World War I and II to now becoming increasingly from different theatres of war, or even general enlistment. So we're talking about Vietnam veterans and national service, as well as Korean War, and even general enlistment, as I said, so people that have joined the army voluntarily. And then I think Matt made a good point before that people that were in East Timor and potentially Bougainville, where I was, if they went there in their 40s and 50s, then they would be coming of age to enter aged care. so be over 65. So certainly the profile, and in that case, the needs of these particular individuals and these veterans is different. It's also that the idea of the veteran has changed. So traditionally it was just about those that had been to war, and now it's anybody that's spent more than one day in the ADF. That is what a veteran is. And also allied forces. We talk about the allied forces, which you alluded to.
People's experience of serving, their reason for serving, the community's perception of military service was really different. In my understanding, for World 1 and 2, veterans versus, say, someone that might have served in the Vietnam War, the community perceptions of that service and their experience of what that might have been like, and then integrating back into the world, that experience is really different. Is that reasonable, Anne, to say?
Oh, absolutely. And I guess that's, Matt will probably talk to this as well in terms of relationship with DVA, but also the RSL. So we've got some Vietnam veterans that feel they were much maligned when they came back from Vietnam, and even now today still hold some animosity towards the RSL for that. And so, we talk a lot, we'll probably talk about this later, about connecting into RSLs and sub-branches, but a lot of people don't want to do that because they feel, they still feel that anger when they came back. Yeah, but they're getting over that, some of them, but they are a very tight, Vietnam veterans tend to be quite a tight, organised group as well.
So I guess just for all of us as service providers, recognising the breadth of diversity within the veteran community is really important. I think sometimes that breadth of diversity, obviously any group of people is not homogenous and all the same. But for example, if you look at called communities, for example, it's glaringly obvious that people of different cultures and faiths and backgrounds, people with different migration experiences, refugees, will have had very different experiences. And I guess I just want to highlight that for veterans, it's exactly the same. So we don't want to be making assumptions about people's experience or what that's like, or their own relationship with being a veteran and all those things. There's just as much diversity in there as well for us to be thinking about. The other thing that is not unique, but certainly important to understand in terms of working with veterans is that the way that veterans access services is different than it might be for other older people. So, for example, for many veterans, they'll be able to access services via My Aged Care and DVA at the same time. So it's important that you understand how those different services might fit together. And there also are a number of, there are at least 3 that I know of, and there might be more, correct me if Matt's nodding, acts that will govern the way that people are eligible to access services. So I'm sure there's quite a bit of complexity that sits behind that, but it's just important to make sure that people are aware of that. One of the reasons why veterans are identified as a special needs group within the Aged Care Act is that there's recognition that being a veteran does have an impact on the way that people age and might interact with aged care services. And so I've got some of the reasons why, but I just want to be really clear that this is a very, very broad brush overview and absolutely not picking up on the complexity of any individual's experience or the nuance of all of this, but it's really some of those key themes around the common experiences that veterans may have had in terms of experiencing trauma and violence, long separations from family and being away from home potentially. That obviously has a significant impact on people. That relocation in itself, and then needing to reintegrate into their community. There are impacts in terms of increased likelihood of chronic health conditions, challenges in terms of mental health, whether that be things like PTSD, drug and alcohol misuse. Veterans are a priority population for suicide prevention in Australia, and that's really important to recognise. I mentioned before that not everybody's experience of being a veteran is the same, but certainly one of the things that I understand has a really big impact on people's longer term health is the way that people might leave or separate from their military service has a big impact. So whether someone chooses to leave or whether someone needs to leave the military for a number of reasons, that can really impact their longer term experience afterwards. One of the things that I have learned much more about is the importance of, for a lot of veterans, of maintaining their veteran identity and that sense of community. I heard Anne mention before that lots of Vietnam vets have really strong communities themselves and strong ties with their community that they maintain. And the importance of those community connections to support people's longer-term health and well-being as well. We also alluded earlier to the fact that not everybody will be comfortable talking about their experience as a veteran, and the way that we go about communicating around that and the way that we approach and respond to each person is going to need to be thoughtful of that, I guess. Matt, I was wondering whether there's anything there that stands out to you that you would like to pick up on or make sure that service providers understand about what might be a bit different in working with veterans than other older people potentially.
You've covered pretty much all of it off there. And within each of those, there's going to be little nuances as well, like especially around the leaving of the military.
Mm-hmm.
It can be, look, most leave the military, and most of the time it's their own choice. But then we get some, and like my example is I was medically discharged, so it was an involuntary discharge.
Mm-hmm.
And that can have an impact on a veteran throughout their life, especially if they've gone into the military quite young and not had that experience sort of in the outside world. It can be very daunting. And the longer you've been in, that the harder it can actually be leaving.
What about in terms of what you would like providers or staff to know about veterans' sense of identity as a veteran and maybe wanting to disclose or not wanting to disclose? Like, should we just be asking everybody if you're a veteran? Should that be a must-do? What kind of things might we consider there?
Definitely, it's important to identify them. And a lot of the time that'll be evident through them having a white card or a gold card issued by DVA.
Mm-hmm.
So if they're not a veteran, they're not going to have one of those. The only exception there is the war widows that would have a gold card. But so that's generally the best indication to know without actually asking the questions. But there's nothing wrong with asking at all. It's, we don't know what we don't know. And the best way to find something out is to just ask.
Sure. I know one of the things that you mentioned when we caught up last week was that there is, in the kind of ether at the moment, lots of people talking about approaching veterans to thank them for their service, and that might not always be appropriate or respectful.
No, that seems to be something we've picked up here from the Americans. In my experience, I've worked with lots of veterans, and I know lots of them as well. Most veterans I know and have spoken to find that quite uncomfortable with somebody coming up saying, thank you for your service. Some don't mind. Ask the veteran, just ask them, how do they feel about somebody thanking them for their time in the military?
Sure.
And take the cue directly from them.
Yeah. I mean, that's really the key to being inclusive for every person, isn't it? Like, rather than making assumptions, just asking what works well for you. What would you like us to know? What can we do for you?
Yep.
Yeah. Beautiful. Thank you, Matt.
No worries.
Bill, what about for you? Is there anything that really stands out here in, it doesn't have to be in your own experience of getting older as a veteran, but what do you think really stands out to you that you'd like providers to know about what might be a bit different in terms of working with veterans?
I think the most important part is recognition of the communal environment which you've had in the military, and doesn't matter which service you served in, we tend to have a common sort of set of values that are important to us, and recognition of each other as individuals and what we've done without getting carried away by it is very important. I think that aspect, I mean, I served in Vietnam and can relate to that terrible response, well, not only from the government and the general population, but also from the RSLs from sort of mid-70s through to the 90s, which was absolutely appalling as far as I was concerned.
Right.
Recognising also that, the primary age group now coming into the aged care environment is sort of, well, certainly Vietnam vets and Korean and later ones too. They've had that little bit of a scar on them as well, I think. And the other thing we're noticing in this environment which I live is that some things that have probably been suppressed for quite a while tend to come out when people get back into the environment and they start talking about stuff to various other people. Oh, I mean, I had that sort of experience. And then this can unfortunately sort of bring flashbacks and perhaps, bring forward mental issues which were not evident in the first instance. So, that aspect that this might occur, and therefore that any provider have it in their thinking process that, well, maybe we might just need some psychiatric supportive part of our organisation. So if this occurs, because the impact on others when that sort of thing can, maybe someone just goes a little bit off course, can impact other people as well. So that's just something that's worth thinking about, I think.
Such a good point, Bill, that people's experience of trauma is not linear, and it's not something that's necessarily predictable. And so certainly one of the common experiences for many veterans are experiences of really significant trauma, and that those can pop up and be unexpected even for the person themselves at any point in their life. So really highlights the importance of, what we refer to as trauma-informed practice and trauma-informed and healing-aware care, which is much more of a focus across aged care now, but certainly for veterans, something to be really aware of, that those things might come up at any point and be a surprise, not only to staff, but to the person themselves. So being equipped to understand and respond to that respectfully is really important.
Yeah, absolutely.
The other thing that I wonder about is, do you have any thoughts, Bill, about, again, this is generalising a little bit, about veterans' perhaps relationship with asking for help?
Yeah, generally speaking, they won't, or they're very reticent in doing so. Can get quite good at complaining, but don't actually direct it to where it ought to go. So, I think unfortunately this is just, possibly an aspect of growing old a little bit too, I suppose. But I think recognition that perhaps the provider, just to be on the front foot a little bit and perhaps looking for things, I'm sure Matt would be right across this one, even sort of, without getting too carried away by it, just probing a little bit just to see is there something there or this, or have you ever thought, has that ever worried you, or something maybe just on the front foot by the provider, perhaps to bring it out of the person involved. Yeah, I think that's quite a strong point actually, Kate.
Yeah, thanks, Bill. I think certainly in my experience, I think that idea that you said, Bill, of being proactive about making sure people know what is available is a really important point. But we know that sometimes people will sort of delay seeking help until they're in a crisis and things are really challenging. So if we can be on the front foot a bit, as you said, and just make sure people are aware and we're asking questions, and linking people in as early as we can, that might be really helpful to avoid that or challenge some of those natural preferences. I think potentially what comes along with being a veteran might be being incredibly resilient and resourceful, and that is a huge asset. But in terms of seeking help and getting linked in at the right time, it might almost work against you when you're super independent and resourceful.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely the point. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you, Bill.
Okay.
And is there anything else that you wanted to mention here, or are you happy to keep moving?
To add to that last point regarding resilience and sometimes a lack of wanting to show any weakness, which is part of their military experience as well. So, another way of getting around that is if, we used to work with Open Arms on workshops, and if you had an anxiety and depression workshop, for example, you wouldn't get many people coming along to that. But if we had a sleep workshop, you're struggling with sleep or something like that, and then, inadvertently brought along the anxiety and depression perhaps underlying that, you'd get a lot more people in. So it's about how you couch things sometimes and how you and talk about them. So, especially for those that are reluctant to and come and seek help. So it's another way of going about it.
Fantastic. Really good idea. The importance of that language and getting your messaging right is, essential all the time. Also, Matt, can you sign me up for your sleep workshop? Because I could really do with some of that. That would be great.
We do provide not so much the sleep workshops, etc., but the suicide prevention education programs. So such as Safe Talk, Assist, and mental health first aid. We can provide that to organisations that work with veterans. That's at no charge. We basically just need about a dozen people, and we can run a course.
Brilliant. That is an excellent resource for people to know about. And Matt, do you also provide additional support to the staff in terms of understanding the needs of veterans and that kind of inclusive practice?
If somebody wants to have a chat, they can just ask to speak to the community engagement team, and someone will get in touch, and we can come out. We can do presentations. We can come out just to have a general chat.
As providers, sometimes we feel like we have to be experts at everything, which is absolutely not the case. But knowing where the experts are is a really massive step in the right direction so that we can link in with that support.
Prevention's a really important sort of part of what we do. Nobody calls us generally if they're having a good day. So a lot of our stuff can be quite reactionary, but the more we can sort of get out and if people can recognise the signs before it gets to that crisis point. And it's different with veterans than it is with the general community.
Yeah.
The presentations can be quite different.
Learning a bit more about what that might look like and learning a bit more about how to respond in a respectful way and how we can set up our organisations to be prepared and equipped is incredibly helpful. So
and managing the triggers as well, because triggers for veterans are quite different to, again, the general community.
Yeah, sure. I think one of the things in terms of trauma-informed practice or trauma-informed care that is sometimes a bit of a misconception for service providers is that being trauma-informed is really different than being able to deliver clinical services to support people address their trauma. It is absolutely not the expectation that all staff across aged care will have the capacity, skills or experience to be able to work with people to address their trauma. What we do want to be able to do is understand that many people have experiences of trauma and that informs day-to-day life, and that different people have different triggers and different people will respond differently. And our job is to be able to, I guess, ask the right questions and make sure that in that moment we can ask someone what they need from us and that we can respond in a safe way. And that if, for example, someone is triggered by loud, unexpected noises, this is an example, I don't know, well, not every staff member needs to know why that is, what that's about, what the history is, etc. What we need to know is that's real, respect that, and then ask the person what works well for them. So it might be about, positioning in the room, might be about what happens, if they are triggered. That kind. Would you agree with that, Matt?
Yeah, absolutely. And monitoring the information that comes in over news and papers and stuff that come through as well.
Yeah,
that can be another one. So it's not always about loud noises, but the more subtle stuff.
Yeah, sorry, that was probably an over.
Yeah, no, that's a good one, because that is an issue for a number of veterans out there.
Bill, I'm wondering, what do you think might impact your decision as a veteran, or perhaps other veterans' decisions about choosing an aged care provider that feels like the right fit for you?
I think the first point would be a safe and secure environment, but I think that probably goes right across the board for every person as they get a little bit older. From the veteran point of view, we do vary a bit right across the board, as Matt was alluding to before. And some of the people in the environment in which I live are very happy in little communal groups. They sit around on their verandas and drink cups of coffee in the morning and chat about the good old days of whatever it was in wherever. And others quite secluded, people that just like to keep themselves, don't want to talk about stuff and whatever. Mm. So I guess what I would be looking for, depending on what my push was, whether I like to become involved or not involved or whatever, would the provider have some recognition of veteran sort of requirements, to the point perhaps even having a part of their operation where the vets go, male and female. But the one thing I think that comes through is we have a common understanding, I think, of how things can work, and therefore it doesn't matter what service you've been in, or whether you be a wife, a widow, or have served, you've got sort of something to talk about, and other people will understand to a high degree, I think, where you're coming from. That's important. That would be important to me. So I'd be looking forward to them saying, well, do they actually have a special think about what vets need, and is there a little section of their place where the vets actually go, or whatever? That might not suit everyone, but in my case, it probably would. I would like to know that there's a few others around not too far away from me that I can go and have a talk to or whatever. That would probably be the main one, that I was welcomed as a vet, recognised that I probably had some different needs to, whether I'd liked it or not, to the general community, and that there were others around who could relate to those needs, I think.
One of the things that's really stood out to me, Bill, was a couple of times today you've talked about a bit of a shared sense of values or kind of common understanding among veterans. So perhaps as a starting point for providers to kind of learn what that looks like and what that is might be really useful.
In the Vasey setup where I live, we have a strong emphasis of the staff had military service. Many of the people have. So there's a recognition of, in some respects, we are a little bit different in the military environment or where we come from, and can recognise that because those staff members have been there and done it. And part of the specialisation verification process is, in fact, that some members of staff have military experience, which is extremely important, I think, because that knowledge that, hey, there's someone up there who can go and talk the same language to her, that is extremely important. So not only the people you live with, but the people who are running the place as well is very important.
Absolutely. And Bill, what about if you were going to have services coming into your home? Is there anything that you would look for as a provider for services coming to you, or perhaps you were going to go out to join a social support group?
A number of people here have various make access to those services, Kate, whether it be cleaning the house once a week or helping them with their garden, a few little maintenance jobs or those sort of things. Yeah, I mean, just knowing that that's available is great, and makes people, just feel, oh, well, they know what my problems are and they're there to help me. All I've got to do is pick the phone up or whatever, and they'll be there. I think that's and I have to give Vasey full credit for that. They're spot on. They do that part very, very well.
I might direct this to Anne first, if that's all right. Why do you think it's important for aged care providers to understand the potentially unique experiences and needs of veterans? What difference does that make to be able to design and deliver services that are inclusive?
Any organisation will have, I imagine, person-centred care and understanding. And it's really just tailoring the care to that unique individual. Mm-hmm. For the veteran community, it is about creating understanding. So I imagine it's just as we would do, finding out their story, understanding, I don't like the word special, so I'll use distinct, that it is a distinct community with distinct needs. I work, and so does Matt, within people that are potentially more vulnerable. So we tend to talk about, as a caveat, that more vulnerable part of the community with those with mental health issues. So just understanding where they've been and potentially what some of these presenting challenges might be for them. Because they will be different to the general community, and they will some of them will want to talk about it and have an understanding. So I think it's important in terms of, as we were just discussing, just getting if you do not have veterans on your staff, then getting getting them, educated on the veteran experience. Mm-hmm. At Vasey RSL Care, we have an induction. So at the Shrine, every single member of our staff does that when they start. And so that's a whole day providing an understanding of where a veteran's potentially been. And that's also allied forces as well, and what they've seen and what some of the presenting issues might be.
I don't like the word special either. I do like distinct, though. That's a good one. I think, though, what stands out to me is that being a veteran is just going to be one part of the person's identity. It's not their entire identity, and that someone might identify with some of the other diversity characteristics as well. But regardless of that, their own experience and circumstances and needs and goals and preferences is informed by their whole life experience. So, there'll be some commonalities among veterans, but there'll also be lots of differences as well. So it always comes back to, as you said, learning each person's story and being capable of delivering that person-centred care. Ultimately, that's what every older person, I believe, would be looking for.
Yeah, but in saying that, it's really it's important to have that knowledge and reflect that when you're discussing it with them. But you can it's just having that compassion and care and understanding the story, and as Matt said, asking the question, and they'll talk back to you as well. So sometimes talk your leg off. So it's great. I mean, if you're passionate, then it's really, I love it.
Matt, is there anything that you wanted to add about why you think it's really important for aged care providers to understand the needs of veterans?
Their health needs can sort of cover a massive sort of spectrum of needs and conditions as well. So, and they can present differently with those. And as we said, a lot of veterans won't put their hand up and say something's wrong. So knowing how to draw that information out of them is a big thing that you need to know and learn.
Sure.
And I'm sure that's not just applicable to veterans. I think that's probably, especially with the older age group, a bit more resilient, I suppose, and a bit more sort of reluctant to be looked at as someone that's having a whinge or a complaint about this ache or that pain, or I'm having these thoughts.
A very good point. Bill, I might come back to you again. How, if you were looking for new providers to work with, either someone coming into your home or, as you said, perhaps progressing into residential care down the track, How would you know whether a service was inclusive for you and going to understand your experience as a veteran?
I'm an engineer by background, so I'm probably a little bit interested in statistics and evidence and all that sort of stuff. I would be going straight to whether their website or the information that anyone was putting forward or saying, well, this is what we can do. I would be having, and all of the questions in the Specialisation Verification Framework would probably be imprinted in my mind, and I would just be going straight down the list and saying, do you do this? Do you do that? Have you got this? Have you got that? Because, the whole point of it really is focusing on a need for a particular group of people. If I'm in that group, I want to see, well, how well can you do this? And how well do you promote yourself? I would be very much inclined to ask other people as well. The old boy network is as good as any other around, so you certainly check out with other people, people such as Matt and Anne, if I wasn't associated with Vasey, and just what is this crowd like? Are they really as good as they say they are? So the way they present themselves in promotional material, evidence, all that, I would be looking for in spades, Kate. So that would be the important thing for me. That would be the starting point for me.
Excellent. Bill, I imagine that you will be your best advocate or the worst nightmare of an organisation that's not prepared, because as a systems man and someone that's thorough, being able to ask those questions is brilliant and, a fantastic step forward for you to be able to make a good choice, which is great. Matt, let me come back to you. What did you want to add?
Veterans have a tendency to be very, very black and white in their views and sort of in the information that they take in. Big tip is don't pretend you know something if you don't, because you'll get found out really quickly. And then that certainly won't help. And if you don't know, just say the words, I don't know, and that's fine. But if there's a provider out there that's sort of trying to fudge it a little bit, it's probably not going to work out.
Yeah, fantastic. Such a good point. I think that sometimes people will try and demonstrate inclusion by, for example, wearing a poppy on their lanyard or something like that. But if you can't back that up, walking the walk, then the poppy might get you in more trouble than if you didn't have it at all. Would you agree? Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. If you can wear the poppy, that's great, but know why you're wearing it. Same as if they're going to put information about how they're veteran inclusive and specific in the services they're providing.
Yep.
Actually back it up with some hard facts and information.
One of the criteria around working with veterans is about your physical environment being appropriate and inclusive for veterans. I was wondering if there is anything that stands out to you about what would make a physical environment of a service inclusive or not.
We have 3 aged care facilities, and certainly they do reflect the military experience, I guess, with everywhere. As soon as you walk in, there'll be pictures on the wall, poppies. We've got in Frankston South, we've actually got a veteran wall, so with a flame. So it's that sense that whenever a veteran passes away, then they get their name on the wall. There's some beautiful ceremonies as well. So I think as soon as you walk in, you understand, outside of the name RSL, Vasey RSL Care, that it is veteran centred. Mm-hmm. But certainly there's other ways as well. And I think the issue though now is that as veterans evolve, some of those monikers, I guess, are becoming slightly outdated. So the poppy and is slightly seen as jingoistic by some of the younger veterans. They don't quite relate to that. So it needs an update. We need to find out what the next evolution is, I think, in some ways. So what does it look like? And even then it tends to could be seen as slightly skewed towards the male veteran, where, the female veteran experience could be seen as different. So how do we bring that in and make it more inclusive, not just for veterans, but also for different cohorts of the veteran community? Because we also have war widows, and, it's quite a broad church, so to speak.
I think the point Anne made there is spot on. The Old Boy Network would be the starting point for me, Kate, just to check it out. But then the feel of the place, and you can walk into most organisations in a very short time. You get the feel, is this the same? Is this the vibe that I'm interested in? The point that Anne makes is very valid, that we have a younger cohort coming through now that are maybe not impacted by the poppy aspect or all the rest of it. Maybe we do need to think about something more up to date.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you, Bill. It sounds like there's some learning for all of us in that space about how we might continue to be able to acknowledge military experience without relying on things like the poppy necessarily, or, using famous battle names, Kokoda or things like that are very specific. I guess it sounds to me like there's ongoing work for everyone to be doing in that space. My last question before we sort of move on to talk about the application process is just, Bill, for you, if you were looking for service providers, what difference would it make to you if you could look up and find if a service was verified with the Specialisation Verification Framework? If you were looking for organisations, what difference would that make to you?
Well, as I bored you with before, I'm an engineer by background. I would look for that straight away, Kate. The first book I'd open up.
Very good. You're the right man for the job.
I'd just be looking for evidence straight away of that before I even talk to anyone. So, that'd be me.
Fantastic. And I like the fact that I think that you would not just check that they've got the tick, but then you'd investigate the evidence underneath it to back it up. Fantastic.
Sure.
Or Matt, what about for you? What do you think the benefit is of specialisation verification?
I think it provides the opportunity for that bit of familiarity and consistency of care in a facility or in the person's home.
Yep.
And then sort of that then gives the provider the ability to put together sort of tailored care solutions for those individuals as well.
Just really briefly, the process around applying for specialisation verification is that you need to complete an application online through the My Aged Care provider portal. You need to complete some specialisation evidence form, and then you upload evidence, and you get to choose which parts of your organisation you are going to apply for verification for. So it doesn't have to be for every service across all of your organisation. It might be for specific programs or specific sites, or you are able to determine that. Once you have submitted your application, AHA will assess it, and then they complete a process to collect some additional feedback from clients and carers who identify as part of the veteran community to demonstrate that your organisation is inclusive and that lines up with people's experience. There are lots of resources available to support you through that process, both on the Department of Health and Aged Care's website. One of the key resources is up here on the screen, the Aged Care Provider Guidance Manual. That talks you through that. And if you are successful in your application, then that verification tick will be displayed on the Find a Provider tool like we looked at earlier. In order to achieve verification, there are a couple of different ways to do it. And for each special needs group, the criteria are different. So you might be aware that for some special needs groups, there are two different tiers of criteria. For veterans, there are only tier 2 criteria. So there are no tier 1 criteria for working with veterans. As a provider, when you submit your application, you need to provide evidence against at least 4 of these criteria. And they relate to certainly being a not-for-profit veteran community organisation is one of them. I think Bill mentioned before having staff members who are veterans and are supported to be champions within their organisation in your work with veterans is really important. Being able to support veterans to have ongoing access to DVA services and maintaining those connections with local RSL and ex-service organisations, really important one. We spoke earlier about the physical environment, having at least 90% of your staff completing relevant annual training. And that one of the kind of key things around that is there aren't really specific criteria around what the requirements of training are, sort of how much or how often, but it is at least annual, so it's ongoing. It's not a 5-minute tick and flick kind of exercise to tick that off. And really making sure that that training includes understanding the experience of veterans and the impact of being a veteran on people's health and experience in working with the sector. But part of that is also about trauma-informed care as well. And then how you integrate your approaches to inclusion into, say, policies and procedures, having a ex-service advisory group, having a veteran representative on your board or exec group. So there are lots of different ways to do that. And the other one, which I didn't mention, was about supporting ongoing access and being connected to local commemoration ceremonies and events. That's hard to say, commemoration ceremonies. So there were a couple in there, and Matt, I might ask you about this one if it's okay, around facilitating ongoing access to DVA services or supporting people's connections to RSL and ex-service organisations. That was something that Bill and Anne had also both referenced during our conversation today. Is there anything that stands out there for you that would be considered good practice, I guess?
Knowing where to refer a veteran to, whether it be to Open Arms or to the local RSL or being in Veterans Association, if that's appropriate. Just knowing where to go for, and depending upon what the needs of that veteran are as well. So if they're having some mental health issues, Open Arms is the first place to go. But if they're looking at dealing with DVA for claims, etc., or for expansion of services that they're going to access, then RSL or one of the other ex-service organisations that provide advocacy services are the place to go. So it's just knowing who does what out there.
And in the resource list for today's session, we've included links to a number of ex-service organisations, some local ones and some, organisations like that RSL, I imagine lots of people are familiar with. But the fact that each branch and sub-branch works a bit differently within the RSL might not be something you're familiar with. So knowing that kind of local context is really important. But for everybody, please know that on your resource list, we do have some of those ex-service organisations in there. So that might be helpful for you to connect with. The other one that I thought might be just useful to think about for a moment, and I was just wondering if you have any ideas around important things for providers to be thinking about in terms of supporting people to stay connected with, local ceremonies, veteran events, those kind of things.
We have a lot of connection into the in terms of events and commemoration and services. So we work with the local RSLs to hold these events, or we actually, especially within our independent living, we get the people within our independent living to hold their own. So we assist them, but they can work within the local services to hold their own ceremonies. So that works really well, I think, as well. So getting the veterans involved in these services and telling, getting from them how they would like them to be run, I guess, is a really good way of doing it, particularly with Anzac ceremonies and things like that. But you can, there's lots of ways. We've got, there's local Navy bands that can come out and play, or, there's even, Kelleher parties, lots of things like that you have to think about. But the veterans will be very good at telling you how it should be run as well. We also have within our organisation training before, so we have a video before every event. So Remembrance Day, we have a video that explains, that someone in our office has put together, that explains what the event's about. So that was very helpful. So everybody on the staff, and it's only 10 to 15 minutes, could have a look at that and then understand why we commemorate Remembrance Day. So that helps as well.
When we caught up last week, one of Matt's colleagues, Belinda, joined us as well. And one of the things that she mentioned was things like just being aware that being able to support people to attend local events might impact on your staffing for certain days, or, the kind of support that people might need to access those events, and all the different ways that people can link into events, whether it's attending physically or other ways. Through COVID, obviously, people got a whole lot better at being able to commemorate important events in different ways. But it's sort of not just as simple as knowing when they're happening, but bigger picture, what that means for your organisation. So just keeping those things in mind, I guess.
Some of the feedback I've got from today's session talks about how sometimes veterans all being put together in, say it was a veterans outing. That's not necessarily a good thing, I'm sort of picking up, because it might draw up issues that people haven't addressed before. I was just trying to get some feedback on that. Would you do a veterans planned activity group, or would you just do your usual planned activity group? So it's not specialised.
Fantastic question. Bill, Matt, or Anne, do you have any insight into whether you think it would be a good idea to have more specialised kind of programs and outings, or whether there might be any challenges in that?
We run specific outings for veterans to many, war museums or memorials, and they are very well received. So I certainly wouldn't hold back on those fronts at all, because I definitely think that there's certainly an element, more of an understanding than anything else. I think sometimes, as Bill alluded to, that things come up, but I think more often than not, these communities come together with a shared understanding, and certainly the outing will be, if it's that specific. But I'm guessing you're talking about widows or family members of ex-serving as well, so they often join in, and it's very well received.
And I think certainly in terms of being able to respond to any triggers, for example, that people might experience, it's really about being prepared, as you said, Francis, to ask those questions in advance and find out about what works for people and what people might need in that situation. Whether that relates to their veteran experience or not. Being able to be prepared to ask better questions, I guess, is helpful for everybody. Val had a question that Bill brought up about access to mental health care, perhaps addiction services, alcohol, food, drugs, smokers.
We do have many connections into some of the other services that are out there for AOD issues, but I'll let Matt probably talk about a bit more about that.
Yeah, so with the AOD services, we can certainly assist veterans with getting access to treatment programs, whether they're as outpatients or residential. Depends on the circumstances of each individual, but that's certainly something that we can facilitate through our clinical care coordinators, which are sort of the next step up from what I do.
My question was to Matt. He was talking about having 12 people to run a course. Do you do them online or in person?
With our group treatment programs, again, we've got several of those. So we've got the Sleeping Better program, we've got the Managing Pain one. We also do anger management, depression, anxiety, and a trauma recovery program. They are for veterans. They have tried running these online, and they don't work that well. They're in person, and we get a really good attendance rate for these. We run a number of these a year. A lot of the time they'll be referred onto these by, they might be seeing a counsellor through us, or they might be seeing someone like myself, and we might suggest that, so that it's a sort of a warm referral into it. And yeah, we get a very good sort of interest and attendance rate for those.
There are some options for individual online or telephone counselling, aren't there, for one-on-one support? Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. If someone just wants to have a chat, they can just call through to our 1-800 number, and they can get to speak to a clinician on that number. And again, that will a lot of the time then lead on to engaging with the peer program or engaging with ongoing counselling or psychology services. And then that can just build on to more and more, dependent again on the individual's needs. Some people just need someone to have a chat to that gets it, that's been there.
Yeah, sure.
Some need a lot more intensive, complex care, even to the point of hospitalisations and psychiatric assessments and medication reviews.
So that might be another way to capture those people that don't feel comfortable in that group environment or coming together face-to-face. Certainly there are other options that they can link in with support that might work better for them. So, yeah, beautiful. Thank you, Matt. We've had another great question come through in the chat. Is it possible that some people may make assumptions about veterans, who they are, what's important to them? Are there any really obvious myths that you might be able to bust? It's an excellent question.
When I recently went to a lunch and I was wearing my medals, and someone came up to me and said that I was wearing them on the wrong side because, they weren't mine. Obviously, they thought they weren't mine and they were my family or relatives. So it was true that there was only about 3 women at that event, but that's pretty typical of what it's. Thankfully now it's becoming more outdated, but that generally, the idea that only men were in the military, particularly in the army. So I think that's one, not an obvious, that's not a myth, but it's certainly a preconception that's out there. We're getting women in that are, that have spent 20 years in the military, and, it's certainly you need to recognise that service and understand that.
I think that's probably more common than people might realise. I was actually working with someone recently, and they have a DVA Gold card, and a staff member asked them, did your husband serve in the Defence Force before he passed away? Someone was like, no, I did. And very rightly so, really had a go at the staff member. And I thought, she won't ask that question again. They make that assumption again. So, yeah, I imagine you're not the only person that's experienced that. Any other obvious myths, Bill or Matt, that you would like to bust wide open?
We're not all broken. Not every veteran sits there dealing with PTSD on a day-to-day basis. We're all individual, and each person's needs are going to be different. Each person's triggers are going to be different. We were all sort of indoctrinated into that system, I suppose, is probably the term that covers it best. But we're still all individuals.
I think that point Matt made there is spot on. Yes, we are individuals. I regard myself as extremely lucky that I got through my service and don't have any absolute evidence of problems, mental or physical. Not at this stage, anyway. So no, we are different. But some people's perceptions of running around shooting guns and all the rest of it comes up with a picture, I suppose, but that doesn't really fit with most people who've been there and done it.
And I know Anne mentioned before as well that often people like yourself, Anne and Matt, are working with people who are more vulnerable and might be experiencing, challenges with their mental health, for example, but a really good reminder that that's not everyone's experience. It'd be really great to check in and go back to your organisation and think about where you sit in terms of your current work with veterans, what you're already doing really well, what are the next steps for you in terms of progressing that work towards inclusive practice, and whether you proceed towards applying for specialisation verification or not. Certainly, I think the framework can really help guide your work in terms of that ongoing quality improvement. We work in this space not because we want to get ticks and fill in forms. Even if you are like Bill and an engineer, and fantastic, I imagine Bill would be at paperwork and checking off the evidence. The reason that we work in this space is because we really care about delivering the best possible services for our community. And so getting better at understanding what veterans' experiences might be like and what's important and how we can ask better questions and deliver that person-centred care is going to help all of us be able to achieve that.